The searchlight beam swept past PT-109's position 3 times before Lieutenant John F. Kennedy realized the Japanese destroyer couldn't see them, and that understanding lasted exactly 11 seconds before everything went wrong in the worst possible way. August 1st, 1943, and 15 American sailors were lying flat against 80 feet of mahogany planking in the Blackett Strait, where 3 Packard engines sat silent while a 2,000-ton warship prowled less than 300 yards away. Kennedy's hands gripped the helm with enough force to leave marks in the wood because this was supposed to be a simple intercept mission against the Tokyo Express, the nightly Japanese destroyer runs that had been supplying enemy garrisons throughout the Solomons with near impunity for months. Motor machinist's mate Patrick McMahon monitored engine temperatures that were climbing despite the shutdown because these modified aircraft engines weren't designed for tropical salt. Water operations, and Torpedo Man. Andrew Kirksey stood ready at the Mark 8 torpedo tubes, where each fish carried 466 pounds of TNT that might actually hit something if the depth control problems didn't make them run deep, or the gyroscope failures didn't send them in circles, or the detonators didn't fail on impact like they had in dozens of previous attacks. Around them, the night was alive with sounds of Japanese voices calling across water that the Imperial Navy believed it owned after sunset. And they had good reason for that belief, because American surface forces had been getting slaughtered in night engagements since the war began. The destroyer's searchlight moved on, and Kennedy whispered the attack order. So 3 engines roared to life simultaneously, and PT-109 surged forward with her bow lifting as acceleration pushed toward 40 knots. The element of surprise lasted 7 seconds before Japanese gunners spotted the phosphorescent wake and tracers reached across the water in green lines that looked beautiful until you realized they were designed to kill you. And the crew was committed now because there was no turning back from an attack run that had already been detected by an enemy with superior night fighting experience and weapons that outranged everything America had floating. This is the story of how the United States Navy took wooden boats powered by car engines and turned them into weapons that terrified the most experienced night fighters in the world, how volunteer crews learned to hunt steel warships in darkness using tactics nobody had taught them, and how a weapon system that senior officers dismissed as a coastal defense curiosity became one of the Pacific War's most effective ship killers, despite casualty rates that would have broken less determined men. The Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, demonstrated exactly how badly American forces were losing the night-fighting war, and the numbers told a story that made senior commanders physically ill when they read the casualty reports. 7 Japanese cruisers and 1 destroyer surprised Allied warships guarding the Guadalcanal landings in an engagement that lasted 32 minutes from first shot to final torpedo. And when dawn broke over Iron Bottom Sound, 4 Allied cruisers were on the bottom, with 3 others damaged, while over 1,000 American and Australian sailors were dead. The Japanese suffered fewer than 60 casualties and didn't lose a single ship because their crews had trained for years in low-light combat, while their Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes carried twice the range of American weapons with warheads holding 1,080 pounds of explosives that could break a cruiser's keel. Admiral Ernest King, commanding the U.S. fleet, faced a strategic nightmare because Japanese forces were running reinforcement convoys every night with destroyers that could deliver troops and supplies to enemy garrisons, evacuate wounded personnel, and withdraw before dawn brought American air attacks. American cruisers and destroyers attempting to intercept these Tokyo Express runs fought at severe disadvantage, where Japanese optical equipment was superior for night operations, their crews more experienced in darkness, and their tactics more refined through years of peacetime training that American forces had never prioritized. The Navy needed something different, because conventional surface warfare wasn't working, and submarines were too slow to intercept fast-moving destroyer convoys, while aircraft couldn't fly at night with sufficient accuracy to hit moving ships in narrow channels between islands. What was required was a vessel that could operate in complete darkness, strike with devastating power against targets 10 times its size, and escape before superior enemy forces could coordinate a response that would blow it out of the water. The concept already existed in the form of motor torpedo, boats that the British Royal Navy had been developing since World War I, but few senior American officers took them seriously because they were small, uncomfortable, mechanically unreliable, and crewed by volunteers who seemed more interested in breaking regulations than following them. The Pacific War was about to prove that sometimes the weapons dismissed as impractical toys become the tools that win campaigns, but only after those volunteer crews learned how to kill in conditions that would have seemed impossible before the shooting started. Lieutenant Commander John Harley returned from the 1937 British Royal Navy Fleet exercises convinced that America needed motor torpedo boats immediately. But the Navy's response was reluctant authorization for a design competition in 1939 that most senior officers viewed as a waste of time and resources. Elko Naval Division, Higgins Industries, and Huckins Yacht Corporation competed for contracts, and the Elko 80-foot design became the standard production model with a hull constructed from 2 layers of 1-inch mahogany planking that was laminated with waterproof glue and fastened with thousands of bronze screws. This wooden construction had advantages that steel couldn't match because wood didn't show on primitive early radar systems. It could absorb tremendous punishment from small arms fire and shrapnel without catastrophic failure, the way steel hulls shattered, and battle damage could be repaired quickly using materials available at any tropical port with basic woodworking tools. 3 Packard 4M 2500 engines, generating 1,500 horsepower each, drove the boats to speeds exceeding 41 knots in calm water, and these engines were modified versions of the Packard Fa-12 Liberty aircraft engine that had been marinized for saltwater operation but maintained their aircraft heritage of high power and lightweight. Fuel capacity was 3,000 gallons, giving a range of approximately 500 nautical miles at cruising speed. But that range dropped dramatically at combat speeds, where the engines consumed fuel at rates that would have bankrupted a small nation if the Navy had to pay civilian prices. Armament evolved constantly as combat experience revealed what worked and what didn't, but early PT boats carried 4 21-inch torpedo tubes with Mark 8 torpedoes, a 50-caliber machine gun on the foredeck, 2 50-caliber guns in twin mounts amidships, and sometimes a 20mm Oerlikon cannon on the fantail. The Mark 8 torpedo was problematic from the start because it weighed 2,600 pounds, carried a 466-pound TNT warhead, and theoretically could travel 16,000 yards at 27 knots, but in reality suffered from depth control problems that made them run too deep under targets, circular running patterns that endangered the launching boat, and premature detonations that wasted the weapon while alerting every enemy ship within miles. Production began in 1941, and by December 7th, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Navy had commissioned motor torpedo boat squadrons 1 and 2 with 29 boats total. Most senior officers still considered PT boats experimental curiosities that might be useful for coastal defense, but weren't serious weapons for fleet combat, and they maintained this opinion right up until combat operations proved them catastrophically wrong about almost everything they thought they understood regarding night warfare in confined waters. Motor torpedo boat Squadron 3 was stationed at Manila Bay when Japanese aircraft attacked the Philippines on December 8, 1941, and 6 PT boats survived the initial raids before immediately beginning combat operations that revealed harsh realities about tropical warfare with equipment designed for different conditions. Lieutenant John Bulkley commanded PT-34, and led aggressive patrols that harassed Japanese invasion forces while earning him the Navy Cross. But early operations demonstrated that PT boats were maintenance nightmares in humid, salt-laden environments, where Packard engines designed for aircraft use required constant attention. Spark plugs fouled, fuel pumps failed, cooling systems corroded, and boats that could achieve 41 knots in Rhode Island struggled to maintain 35 knots in the Philippines, while crews worked around the clock keeping engines operational by cannibalizing parts from damaged boats to keep others running. The Mark VIII torpedo proved worse than unreliable because it was actively dangerous where multiple PT boats reported torpedoes that ran in circles endangering the launching boat. Depth settings were inconsistent, so some torpedoes porpoised by jumping clear of the water during their run, while others dove deep and passed harmlessly under targets, and premature detonations wasted fish while alerting enemy ships to attacks. In the first 6 months of PT boat combat operations, more than half of all torpedoes fired either missed, malfunctioned, or failed to detonate on impact, creating situations where crews risked their lives closing to point-blank range only to watch their primary weapon fail spectacularly. The fall of the Philippines forced a dramatic evacuation, where on March 11, 1942, Lieutenant Bulkeley's PT-41 evacuated General Douglas MacArthur, his family, and key staff from Corregidor to Mindanao in a 560-mile journey through Japanese-controlled waters. 3 other PT boats carried additional personnel, and all 4 boats arrived safely despite Japanese aircraft attacking them multiple times during the 35-hour voyage. And MacArthur awarded Bulkeley the Medal of Honor, while PT boats received their first significant publicity that couldn't hide the operational problems. Of the 6 PT boats that fought in the Philippines, only 1 remained operational when American forces surrendered in May 1942, and that boat was scuttled to prevent capture. The squadron had conducted numerous patrols, engaged Japanese vessels repeatedly, and earned multiple decorations while achieving confirmed sinkings that remained disappointingly few, with 0 destroyers, 1 confirmed freighter, and several small craft. So the Navy needed better tactics, better weapons, and better understanding of how to employ these unconventional craft before PT boats could become the weapons their advocates claimed they could be. Guadalcanal became the proving ground where PT boat tactics evolved from theoretical doctrine to practical combat techniques that actually killed enemy ships, and the transformation happened through trial, error, and accumulated experience paid for with the lives of crews who learned the hard way what worked and what got you killed. Marines landed on August 7, 1942. Seizing the partially completed Japanese airfield and beginning a brutal 6-month campaign, while motor torpedo boat squadrons 3 and 5 deployed to Tulagi Harbor just across the channel, where their mission was interdicting the Tokyo Express. The tactical situation suited PT boat capabilities perfectly because Japanese destroyers followed predictable routes through narrow channels between islands while operating on tight schedules that required completing supply runs, and withdrawing before dawn brought American air attacks, and the confined waters prevented the Japanese from using their superior speed and maneuverability to full advantage. Early engagements were frustrating exercises in failure, where on October 10, 1942, PT boats attacked a Japanese destroyer force in Iron Bottom Sound, and all torpedoes missed before the destroyers counterattacked and forced PT boats to flee at high speed, while Japanese guns chewed the water around them. Similar encounters followed with PT boats making aggressive attacks, launching torpedoes that ran poorly or missed entirely, then escaping in darkness while enemy searchlights and gunfire pursued them through channels that offered limited maneuvering room. The breakthrough came from studying failures rather than celebrating the occasional success, and crews realized that traditional Navy approaches to torpedo attacks didn't work for PT boats because launching from 1,000 yards gave destroyers too much time to evade. Japanese lookouts were exceptionally skilled at spotting torpedo wakes and maneuvering to comb the tracks. So PT, boats needed to close much nearer by accepting greater risk to achieve higher probability of hits that might actually sink something. If you want to see how PT boat crews revolutionized their tactics to achieve the first confirmed destroyer kill, and how these wooden boats became the terror of the Tokyo Express, despite suffering some of the highest casualty rates in the Navy, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because every like and subscription helps us share these meticulously researched combat stories with more people, and it tells YouTube to show this content to viewers who understand that sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones nobody expected to work. Lieutenant Commander Alan Montgomery took command of PT boat operations at Guadalcanal in November 1942 and revolutionized tactics by emphasizing silent approach using a single engine at low throttle until reaching 500 yards or less, then full acceleration to launch torpedoes at point-blank range, followed by immediate retirement at maximum speed using darkness and the boat's small size to escape. He also stressed patience where it was better to let a target pass than launch a low-probability attack that revealed your position and accomplished nothing except alerting every enemy ship in the area. The new tactics worked because on December 11, 1942, PT-59, commanded by Lieutenant John Searles, torpedoed and sank the Japanese destroyer Teruzuki in Ferguson Passage for the first confirmed PT boat kill of an enemy destroyer. This proved that small wooden craft could kill major warships when employed correctly, and the psychological impact on Japanese forces was significant because destroyers running the Tokyo Express now faced threats from submarines below, aircraft above when they stayed too late, and fast surface craft operating in darkness from positions that were impossible to predict. Coordination with coastwatchers provided crucial intelligence. Because Australian and native Solomon Islander scouts operating behind Japanese lines radioed regular reports of enemy ship movements that gave PT boats warning of approaching targets, time to position for ambush, and information about escort strength. The intelligence network turned random patrols into focused hunting expeditions, where crews knew when targets were coming, what route they'd follow, and how many escorts would be protecting them. By February 1943, when the Japanese finally evacuated Guadalcanal, PT boats had established themselves as effective weapons with confirmed kills, including multiple destroyers, several transports, and numerous barges and small craft, plus damage to many other vessels. Just as importantly, the mere presence of PT boats forced Japanese forces to alter their operational patterns, use different routes that were longer and more dangerous, and commit additional escorts to protect their supply runs, so the wooden boats had proven their worth through sustained operational pressure that degraded enemy effectiveness. Spring and summer 1943 saw PT boat tactics reach maturity as lessons from Guadalcanal spread throughout the PT boat force, while new construction incorporated feedback from combat veterans and training evolved to reflect actual combat conditions rather than peacetime assumptions that had proven useless. The boats themselves improved through modifications that addressed problems identified during combat operations, where fuel system improvements reduced fire risk, additional armor-protected engine rooms and gun positions, and better mufflers decreased noise signature, which was crucial for silent approaches that were the key to successful attacks. Armament became more flexible as crews began removing some torpedo tubes to make room for additional guns. And in the Philippines and New Guinea, where PT boats increasingly operated in shallow water, unsuitable for torpedoes, but ideal for engaging enemy barges, some boats mounted 37mm automatic cannons, multiple 20mm Oerlikons, additional 50 caliber machine guns, and even 81mm mortars. Tactics varied by theater because in the Solomons, PT boats continued interdicting Japanese reinforcement runs with greater effectiveness as crews gained experience and weaponry improved, while in New Guinea, General MacArthur's forces advancing along the northern coast used PT boats for coastal patrol, commando insertion, evacuation of isolated garrisons, and attacking Japanese barge traffic that was the only way Japanese forces could move supplies. The Blackett Strait engagement on August 1, 1943, demonstrated both the potential and the dangers of PT boat operations when 15 PT boats attempted to intercept a Japanese destroyer convoy running supplies to Vila. Lieutenant Kennedy's PT-109 was operating independently when the Japanese destroyer Amagiri struck. It at high speed and cut the PT boat in half, killing 2 crew members instantly, while the survivors, including Kennedy, spent the next week hiding on small islands while Japanese forces searched for them. Native coastwatchers eventually rescued the crew, and Kennedy received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his leadership during the survival ordeal. But the incident highlighted how dangerous PT boat operations remained even as tactics improved. Statistical analysis from this period shows PT boats achieved their greatest success not through spectacular destroyer kills that made headlines, but through sustained pressure on Japanese logistics, where every barge sunk meant supplies that never reached Japanese garrisons, every transport damaged meant troops who couldn't be reinforced, and every destroyer forced to retreat meant a mission uncompleted. PT boats created a climate of uncertainty that forced the enemy to dedicate resources to escort duties and defensive measures that could have been used elsewhere, demonstrating that effectiveness in warfare isn't always measured by dramatic single victories, but sometimes by accumulated small victories that degrade enemy capabilities over time. General MacArthur's return to the Philippines in October 1944 brought PT boats back to where their combat history began, and 7 PT boat squadrons totaling over 100 boats supported the liberation campaign from Leyte through the final battles on Luzon in waters that suited PT boat operations perfectly. Thousands of islands created a maze of channels, straits, and passages where small craft held advantage over larger vessels, while shallow water limited destroyer operations. But PT boats could navigate almost anywhere with their shallow draft and wooden hulls that could survive grounding on coral reefs that would have ripped the bottom out of steel ships. The Battle of Surigao Strait on October 24th through 25th saw PT boats participate in the last major surface engagement of the war, where 39 PT boats from multiple squadrons positioned themselves along the approaches to Leyte Gulf, preparing to intercept Japanese battleships attempting to disrupt American landings. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's force, including 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 destroyers, entered Surigao Strait shortly after midnight, and the PT boats attacked in waves by launching torpedoes and raking the Japanese ships with gunfire where most torpedoes missed or malfunctioned, but the PT boats succeeded in alerting American battleships and cruisers waiting in ambush further up the strait. More importantly, the constant PT boat attacks disrupted Japanese formation and forced the battleships to maneuver, which degraded their approach to the decisive surface action that followed. When American battleships opened fire at 03:51 hours, Nishimura's force was already disorganized from hours of PT boat harassment, and the result was annihilation, where both Japanese battleships sank along with 3 destroyers, while only 1 Japanese destroyer escaped. PT boats couldn't claim credit for sinking battleships, but their contribution to the victory was significant because they had turned an organized battle line into a confused gaggle of ships trying to defend against attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Throughout the Philippine campaign, PT boats conducted diverse missions beyond traditional torpedo attacks, where they inserted reconnaissance teams behind Japanese lines, evacuated American personnel from isolated positions, rescued downed pilots, transported supplies to Filipino guerrilla forces, and patrolled aggressively to maintain sea control in coastal areas that larger ships couldn't access. Barge hunting became a specialty because Japanese forces unable to move supplies by larger ships due to American naval and air superiority relied on hundreds of small barges and coastal vessels, and PT boats hunted these craft systematically by destroying them with gunfire, where on a typical night patrol, a PT boat division might engage and sink 5 to 10 barges while starving Japanese garrisons of critical supplies. By the war's end in August 1945, PT boats operating in Philippine waters had sunk or damaged hundreds of Japanese vessels with confirmed kills, including multiple destroyers, numerous transports, and countless barges and small craft. But more importantly, they had denied Japan effective use of coastal waters throughout the archipelago, while contributing substantially to the American reconquest through sustained operational pressure that never let up. Production totaled 531 PT boats from 1942 through 1945, built by Elco, Higgins, and several smaller contractors with peak strength, reaching approximately 200 boats operational simultaneously in mid-1945. And the boats served in every theater where American forces fought from the Aleutians to the Mediterranean, but achieved their greatest impact in the Pacific campaigns. Casualties reflected the dangerous nature of PT boat operations where approximately 80 PT boats were lost to enemy action, accidents, or weather during the war, while crew casualties ran approximately 25% killed or seriously wounded, one of the highest percentages in the Navy. Over 500 PT boat sailors died during the war, with hundreds more wounded, and these numbers reflected the close-quarters nature of PT boat combat and the minimal protection wooden hulls provided against weapons designed to sink steel ships. The Japanese Navy never developed effective countermeasures to PT boat attacks because their destroyers and escorts attempted various techniques, including using searchlights to locate PT boats, concentrating fire on detected targets, attempting to ram the small craft, and modifying patrol patterns, but none proved consistently effective. The fundamental problem was that PT boats operated on terms of their own choosing where they attacked from ambush, struck quickly, and vanished into darkness before Japanese forces could coordinate responses that might have destroyed them. Japanese naval records captured after the war revealed deep respect for PT boat effectiveness, where one destroyer captain wrote that night, operations in waters where American PT boats operated required constant vigilance and defensive measures that degraded mission effectiveness. Supply officers complained that PT boat interdiction forced reliance on slower, smaller craft that couldn't carry sufficient supplies, while intelligence assessments described PT boats as weapons that created tactical uncertainty and operational complexity disproportionate to their small size and limited numbers. The strategic impact was significant because PT boats never won major fleet battles or sank capital ships in decisive engagements, but their contribution was sustained pressure on Japanese logistics that made supply operations costly and uncertain while disrupting reinforcement schedules and forcing allocation of escorts and defensive resources that could have been used elsewhere. They demonstrated that small, relatively inexpensive weapons systems could achieve strategic effect through operational persistence and tactical innovation, where unconventional thinking combined with aggressive leadership overcame material disadvantages. PT boat crews proved that taking vessels the Navy initially rejected as toys and developing tactics through combat experience could create weapons that influenced the course of the Pacific War and their willingness to close to point-blank range with enemy warships, to operate in conditions other forces avoided, and to persist despite high casualties reflected the courage and determination that characterized American forces throughout the war. The boats themselves were remarkable machines, where wooden craft powered by aircraft engines carried weapons designed for much larger vessels and were operated by volunteer crews in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. And they were uncomfortable, mechanically temperamental, dangerous to crew, and extraordinarily effective when properly employed. By war's end, PT boats had proven that innovation and adaptation could overcome conventional military thinking, because the Navy brass who initially dismissed them as ineffective learned that warfare constantly evolves, that new technologies create new tactical possibilities, and that the weapons dismissed as impractical in peacetime may become essential in war. The Japanese were indeed stunned by America's secret PT boats, but more significantly, they were never able to counter them effectively. And from Guadalcanal to the Philippines, from New Guinea to the Aleutians, PT boats operated in the shadows of the Pacific War by striking from darkness, vanishing before dawn, and accumulating victories that contributed materially to American success. Let us know where you're watching from, because we'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy meticulously researched military history content like this, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we bring you stories of innovation, courage, and tactical brilliance that shaped the outcome of World War II. Drop a comment telling us your location and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific Theater, because you're not just watching history, but you're keeping the memories of these volunteer crews alive. And that matters more than you might realize, because the young men who crewed these wooden boats knew their high casualty rates but volunteered anyway, and they demonstrated courage and commitment that helped win the war.